The snow was falling thick and slow over the small frontier town of Ironwood, the kind of winter that bit to the bone and made a man think twice before stepping out his door. But for little Clara May, there was no door to step out of, no home to keep her warm, and no one in this frozen world to call her kin. Her father, a drifter with a gambling problem and a thirst for anything that burned, had lost everything over the years. First the farm, then the wagon, and finally, as if scraping the bottom of his own soul, he sold the last thing he had that anyone wanted. His daughter, traded to a whiskey-soaked stranger in the corner of the saloon for a single bottle of amber firewater. Clara didn't understand at first. She was only 12, thin as a rail and shivering in her threadbare dress, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest as her father shoved her toward the man with yellowed teeth and a grin that made her stomach twist. That grin, however, froze when another man in the saloon rose from his corner table, tall, broad-shouldered, with a plaid coat dusted in snow and hands calloused from swinging an axe. He was known simply as Elias Crow, the lumberjack from Deep Creek, a man who spoke little but whose presence was enough to quiet most rooms. "She's not yours to sell," Elias said in a voice that was low but carried over the creak of floorboards and clink of glasses. Her father barked out a laugh, slurring, "Ain't yours either, big man. Unless you got something to trade." For a long moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch heavy with coins, hard-earned wages from weeks in the deep timber, and tossed it onto the table. "That's for her," he said flatly. "And you leave town tonight." The drunk stranger tried to protest, but one look into Elias's storm-gray eyes ended any argument. Without another word, Elias stepped to Clara, crouched so he was at her level, and offered his gloved hand. "Come on, little one. You're coming with me." She hesitated. She'd been taught that strangers meant danger, but something in his face told her this was different. It wasn't kindness exactly, but a steady sort of promise that felt safer than anything she'd known in years. She took his hand, and just like that, her life was split into a before and after. The journey to Deep Creek was long, the snow deep, and the cold biting, but Elias kept her bundled in a thick blanket on the sled behind his horse, stopping only to check on her or hand her a tin cup of warm broth from the small fire he built each night. When they reached his cabin, a sturdy, two-room shelter built from logs he'd felled himself, Clara felt as though she'd stepped into another world. The fire roared in the stone hearth, the scent of pine and fresh bread filled the air, and there were shelves lined with books, tools, and jars of preserves. Elias set her up in the smaller room, giving her his own wool blanket and a handmade quilt stitched with careful hands. Life in Deep Creek was different than anything Clara had known. There was work to be done, but Elias never treated her as a servant. She helped stack kindling, learned to feed the chickens, and, to her surprise, was even allowed to use the small axe to split firewood once she'd grown a bit stronger. Elias wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes. He made sure she ate before he did, taught her to read by lamplight on long winter nights, and built her a sled so she could race down the gentle hill behind the cabin when the snow was right. Slowly, the haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by something warmer, something that felt a lot like hope. Years passed, and the girl who had once been sold for a bottle of whiskey grew into a capable young woman with quick hands and a laugh that could fill the cabin. She thought of Elias not as the lumberjack who took her in, but as the only father she'd ever truly had. He never spoke of the day they met, but every now and then, she'd catch him watching her with a quiet pride, as if to remind himself he'd made the right choice that snowy night in Ironwood. One spring, when the thaw came early and the river roared with meltwater, Clara stood on the porch, the sun warm on her face, and realized she had something many people in this harsh land never found. Not just shelter or food, but a home built on something stronger than blood: choice. Friends, if Clara's journey from being cast aside to finding a home in the unlikeliest place has touched your heart, remember there are countless stories from the Old West of grit, redemption, and the people who chose to care when no one else would. Subscribe to this channel to keep these powerful, forgotten tales alive, because every story we tell might just be the one that reminds someone they are worth saving.